It is now my pleasure to introduce Francine Hoben. She is an architect and founding partner and creative director of the Dutch-based company Mecanoo Architecten in Delft, Netherlands. It's a multidisciplinary global firm. Francine Hoben's work ranges from theaters, museums, and libraries to neighborhoods, housing, and parks. Each design is founded on observation of people, location, culture, and climate. So this analysis amounts to designs that respond to current needs, yet are also prepared for predictable and unpredictable change. In short, her work is driven by the ambition to create space to find identity in a globalized world. With her practice, she has gained international acclaim. Selected works include the Delft University of Technology Library, by the way, the Library of Birmingham as well in the United Kingdoms, and the National Kaohsiung Center for the Arts in Taiwan, opened in 2018. Currently, she's working on the renovation of the New York Public Library and the Central Library of Washington, D.C., designed by Mies van der Rohe, which will both reopen in 2020. After a keynote, Francine Hoben will be available for questions during the Q&A session of the following panel talk around 10:30, so you can already prepare any questions you might have. It is an honor to have her today with us and to hear her keynote on envisioning European theatre as public space. So welcome, Francine Hoben.
Okay, thank you. Let me share, optimize screen. Let me see. Can you all hear me? Is it okay like this? Thank you for the introduction. Of course, these are amazing times for the whole cultural world. But I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts, what I started already a year ago before the pandemic, about what is the theater of the future. And I gave it as a subtitle, A Performance Space for All. It's partly of a research I did for the Yale University in collaboration with the Paris Opera House. As you explained, my philosophy is very much about people, place, and purpose, and even on poetry, but also thinking what is theater, and that's why I positioned this image in Taiwan, what is about Chinese theater, but the origin of theater is the street. And maybe we should be much more aware of it. Maybe just for all of you, I'm the creative director of Mecanoo, and we are based in the Netherlands, but we work all over the world. For me, in my whole work, theater has always played an important role. This was my very first project I did for theater in an old church. And it was for an avant-garde theater group. And I also learned that avant-garde means that there's no money. So I was very much inspired how theaters, how they deal with light, with color, what is stage. So for me, it has very much influenced my own world. And maybe I see everywhere theater. I just want to tell you that theater for me is not just a space what is originally designed as a theater. So you can see here what I did for that old church, playing with the light, with the paint of stage, how to play when you don't have a lot of money, how to play with in an existing building with daylight and just using curtains. Another thing, what I want to show you that, as I told you, theater and street are very well connected from origin, but also theater and church. And I just want to show you this little movie. It's a small chapel I made on a cemetery in Rotterdam. But also again, for me, it was done, this design after I did my very first theater. So it's also influenced by that. But I like to show that for me, many places you can use as a theater for drama. Maybe why I show to you this is, for me, theater and the cultural world is in transition. The whole world is in transition. Even for me, public spaces are places where you can make music or theater. For instance, this is the railway station we did design for Rotterdam. And again, for me, it was again influenced by my feeling for theater. So if you look at the inside of this train station, first of all, it's a storytelling place about the city of Delft, but also it's much more theatrical light. It's not like this functional light, it's much more theatrical. Here you can see that you're really attracted to it by this more theatrical light, more drama. But also, what is for me very important, if you ever have the chance to go to this station, there's also, here you see again this theatrical light. The light comes from the floor and it lights up the columns, but also there is the piano. So for me, it's very important that also to stimulate in public spaces, indoor, outdoors, in an informal way, just people passing by who maybe never buy a ticket to go to a performance, or that gets stimulated, or doesn't have a piano at home, or want to share it there. Or so this, I always love it when I'm in the station and somebody is playing the piano. I think that's extremely important also for the development of culture. And here you can go then all the way down to the train after hearing the piano playing. Another thing, what I want to share with you is a library. Again, officially not a theater, although it's also a theater in the library in Birmingham. And what I think is extremely important is to look for who are you designing for, who you want to attract. And I think also in the cultural world, you should be very much aware of it. For instance, in Birmingham, of course, every city is different. Birmingham, it's a second city, it has many identities, it's a very young population. And how do you attract them? Because I think if you're talking about the theater of the future, it's a place for all. And in many countries, it's not a place for all at this moment, also often not even for the young generation. And what we did, designing for that space, I try to understand, this is Birmingham, how is the flow of people? How do people walk in this city? How do they pass by? For instance, I did see a lot of you see all these little points. That's the flow of the people. So I made the box in the middle is the library, but I made a sunken square in front of it to attract people to at lunchtime or even in the evening, to have informal performances just in front of the library. even if you never go into the library, but also has a theater, and that's also the repertory theater is connected to it. It's very well-known theater, but also an outdoor performance space. So to stimulate also this very informal way to get in contact with art and with culture and with performances is for me very important. And even you could say now in this Corona times, the COVID-19 period, it's even more interesting how you can use the public space to give performances. Another one I want to share you with it in another way, it's again in a library. I think the theater world, but also the museum world can learn a lot from libraries, how libraries are developing. This is in a very small, it's a provincial city in the Netherlands. It's in Tilburg. It's next to the train station, the red box. That's what I'm talking about. It was an old industrial hall where they used to repair. You see this hanging locomotives that they used to repair these locomotives. So that's why it's called the Locomotive Hall. And they decided to make a library out of this space. And what I wanted to show you, it's also thinking about identity. For instance, what we did, and I'm very proud of that, we just did the interior of this space. We made what I call the train table. So inspired by the trains that used to be in this locomotive hall, made a huge table out of it. So at daytime, it's used just to read a book or meet other people. But what happens at certain moments that you can, these are 3 train tables, and what you can do with them, it suddenly becomes a performance space at the same time. And so you can use it for events, or it's very playful. So I think we should, and maybe also my idea, be prepared for unpredictable changes, play in a less dogmatic way with spaces. So here you can see how even in this library, I created also many stages here with, for instance, with stacked and glued books. Then my last example, as I told you in the beginning, be aware that the origin of theater, even in the Netherlands, but also in China, is the street. It used to be an outdoor performance. This is a picture I made myself. I love always this picture, people just sitting on plastic chairs or even on a scooter watching Chinese opera. And what we did again in a second city, in the harbor city Kaohsiung of Taiwan, in the southern part of Taiwan, what used to be a military compound, where there were a lot of barracks. It was an empty space, but there were many banyan trees. And for me, the banyan tree was explaining what the culture of Kaohsiung was, but also the climate. This is a tropical tree. It makes a very horizontal crown. All these trees are connected and makes a huge crown. And underneath crown, people do the performances. And it's protecting you from the rain and from the sun. So I felt, there is already a performance space here. So how can I make this outdoor performance space an inspiration for the very big performance theater we had to make had to design in Kaohsiung. And that became our inspiration, protecting you from the rain and the sun, but also combining the formal with the informal, the public space inside with the public space outside. Because, for instance, that's for me, climate and culture is very important. In the southern of Europe, it's totally different climate than in the northern part of Europe. So how can you give an interpretation to that? Although theaters are often everywhere, often the same typology, and I think that's not a good thing. So what we did, what we made out of this banyan tree, we made an interpretation of a big performance art space, a concert hall, a lyric theater, a recital hall, and a playhouse, and an open air theater. We gave them all different identities. We positioned them in the park. And maybe on the left-hand side is maybe the most important sketch. The space in between these 4 auditoria, we kept it open as a tropical space, like the banyan tree, catching the wind of the ocean to cool you down. That's also very sustainable. We don't want to air condition this space. That was our idea, that the building becomes part of the park. And where we put a roof over it, and where the roof touches the park, it became the open air theater. And here you can see the space. It was realized, this building, after I think almost 12 years of working on it. This is what we call the Banyan Plaza. So it's this covered outdoor space, what catches the wind of the ocean. It also has lights, it should feel like a living room of the city, that you can play and adjust light, that it's not always the same. That was for us very important. Getting into the building, into the auditorium, we have here nice stairs and a foyer, and then you have a beautiful concert hall for 2,000 people. But I won't talk about this today because I think it's interesting. This is the recital hall for about 600 people. And this, again, the recital hall. Then there's the playhouse, but it's the most flexible space for 1,600 people. And then an opera house, again, for 2,000 people. But what I want to show to you for today in this whole Corona times, I call it, is how to combine the formal with the informal, make it a place for all. The people, even my dream was always, even if you cannot pay for a ticket, you're still a very pleasant place to go there. So this Banyan Plaza is also in these Corona times the most used space. They organize there, here is with sketching with the children, because to attract the young generation is extremely important. Or they give yoga classes there. Also maybe interesting, what I learned in Taiwan is that people go to the parks early morning to do fitness and yoga classes together. They don't go to a fitness club, they do it in the park, it's for free, and they organize it by themselves. Or here what we did, again, this is again in our Banyan Plaza, just in an informal way, organizing with headsets, with sound and projection to look at movies. Also here it's happening. And you can see here that through these holes, they are open, you look back to the city. But also even big parties sometimes. This was a big, how do you call it? With big dancing. I'll show you later. And the kids also really love the space to play with it. At the end, I will show you. And here you see how it is positioned in the park, and that the open air museum, not the open air museum, the outdoor seating is facing a big field of grass. So you can also, the building itself becomes the stage. I will show you later. So here you can see that here also, because of how we did design the park, also the building is not just for auditoria, it's not just the Banyan Plaza, but also the building itself becomes a stage. Here's a movie I will share with you. Today, October 13, 2018, is a special day for Taiwan. Standing inside is really like a tropical idea.
让我们一起欢迎蔡总统。Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Republic of China.
Become a true people's palace, especially designed for all people of Taiwan. Thank you. 谢谢。
我要特别感谢大家，特别感谢蔡总。
So that I want to share with you, that I think also the world is in transition, but also the cultural world should react on it and is also in transition. And for me, the theater of the future is a performance space for all. And that's for me very essential. Thank you.
Wow, that was really impressive. Thank you so much, Francine Houben, for your amazing, inspirational, and so diverse work. And of course, for sharing with us your thoughts for a vision of a truly European theater space. Thank you very much. Impressive. We are going now further introducing the next panel talk, the making of European theater investing in international collaboration. We welcome two renowned and truly European artists, Angelica Lidl from Spain and Thomas Ostermeier from Germany, in a discussion moderated by the South African performance artist, writer, and co-founding director of the socio-cultural arts organization Anybody Zin, Kopano Maroja, who is currently based in Belgium and works as a dramaturg and programmer at the Arts Center Vooruit. Hello, welcome.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for that introduction, Gina. And hello to everyone that's joining us here today. As Gina so quickly introduced, my name is Kopano Maroja, and I am indeed a South African performance artist, writer, and cultural worker currently working as a curator and guest dramaturg at the Kunstencentrum Vooruit in Ghent, Belgium. And today we'll be entering into a panel discussion focused on investing in international collaboration in European theater. We want to interrogate what the needs are to establish ongoing European partnerships among institutions and artists. What are the structural, political, social, and lingual barriers and differences, the specific challenges that often prevent an exchange, and how can they be overcome? How could the EU incentivize institutions to invest into international collaborations with other institutions, and even more so with artists and independent theater companies from other countries and regions? How can we ensure that theatrical experiences, concepts, and aesthetics continue to convey ideas that will circulate and help build Europe? The invited guest speakers will discuss and share their experiences with international collaborations, two perspectives meeting, one from an artist without an institutional structure and based in Southwest Europe and Spain with a less sustainable funding structure. The other from an artist and a head of an institution based in Middle Europe in Germany that holds one of the best funded theater systems in Europe. It is my pleasure to introduce our guests, Angelica Lidl, who is a writer, stage director, actress, and founder of the company Atrabilis Teatro in Madrid, Spain, and Thomas Ostermeier, who is the artistic director of the Schaubühne in Berlin, Germany. Thomas, I'd like to invite you to share with us how you are today, where in the world you are joining us from, and taking a moment to share a little bit more about the work that you do at the Schaubühne.
Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Yeah. Yes, hello. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Hello, Angelica. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you for having me on this panel. As you might know, in German theater, the idea and the concept of national theater was a founding project of Germany as a nation, because Germany came not together as a nation as soon as all the other European states, but pretty late. And so they tried to build a nation via a national theater where people gather around the idea of a shared language. So this concept might even be a concept for the future, but of course not for Germany, but for the whole world, to have theater as a first step towards a world society. And I'm explicitly not talking about European society, as I do believe that where Europe is going at the moment as a fortress is not the best way to go. So basically, when I came to Schaubühne, this idea of international theater was for me the most important idea, which I tried to put forward as a contrary position, as a contradictory position to this idea of national theater in the tradition in Germany. So my idea was to host not only writers from everywhere in the world, because I made my first steps in my career with English-speaking writers from Ireland, from the UK, from America. So contemporary writing was pretty important at the beginning, but also it was important from the very first year to have this Festival of International New Drama, where we tried to invite the most edgy, at times the most promising international artists from all around the world, and amongst them Angelica Little, but a lot of other companies, theater makers from everywhere, and quite often co-productions. By this, we helped these companies to continue their work, because for these independent companies, as you know, co-production is a mean to survive as a company.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Angelica, I would like to extend the same questions to you. How are you today? Where in the world are you joining us from? And can you share just a little bit more about the work that you do with your company, Atrabilis Teatro?
Pues mi compañía, la verdad, es que siempre se ha movido dentro del territorio de la dificultad.
So my company has always moved within the terrain of difficulty.
Entonces estamos muy acostumbrados a trabajar con la adversidad. Siempre trabajamos con la adversidad económica, y bueno, ese es donde se desenvuelve nuestro trabajo, ¿no? Tenemos que ser muy imaginativos para poder seguir adelante.
Saying that we're very accustomed to working with adversity, with economic adversity and things like that. So right now we're in the zone. We're used to working with adversity.
Por otra parte, cuento con la hostilidad de toda la familia teatral española, con lo cual, bueno, con eso ya cuento desde que tenía 25 años.
From the other side, I have to deal with the hostility from the theatrical family in Spain, but yeah, you know, we've been dealing with that since I was 25 years old.
Hay una especie de dictadura estética en la que yo soy la moderna y yo me considero una trágica, no me considero una moderna.
There's a kind of aesthetic dictatorship in the country where they consider me a kind of modern kind of person, where I consider myself more tragic.
Y por otra parte, pues yo me reconozco heredera de una tradición gitana, que iban los gitanos con una cabra y con una escalera, y la cabra se tenía que poner en la escalera y luego pasaban la gorra e iban pidiendo dinero, ¿no? Y esa es mi realidad con la coproducción, ¿no? Voy como con mi cabra, hago así, y pido, ¿no? Digo, dame un poco para poder yo trabajar, dame, que tengo que trabajar, ¿no? Que tengo que darle de comer a mis hijos.
I feel a bit more like a kind of a gypsy tradition, which is you'd turn up in a village, you'd take your goat, you'd have a set of stairs, and you'd let the goat climb up the stairs, and then you'd pass by underneath with a pan asking for money. And I feel a bit like that in this situation, walking around asking for money, saying, hey, I need food, I need money because my kids need to eat.
Entonces, bueno, mi relación con la coproducción es, tengo una idea en la cabeza, digo, wow, ¿qué idea tengo? Le digo a Sindo, vete a buscar dinero. Y entonces, bueno, pues va Sindo intentando encontrar a personas que puedan apoyar ese proyecto, ¿no?
So my idea for co-production is that I have an idea in my head and I say, wow, this is a great idea. I speak to my co-producer.
Great.
Okay, well, maybe a great idea, yeah. And I speak to my co-producer, Sindo, and I say, hey, go and find us some money. And he goes out and he tries to make the connections on an international level, and then we go from there.
Con lo cual ahora, pues con esta situación estamos desolados porque, claro, toda nuestra manera de, nuestros medios de obtener apoyo para poder elaborar nuestros proyectos han desaparecido, ¿no? De repente, ¿no?
So now we're a little bit lost because the ways that we had to co-produce now, they've disappeared. So now it's a difficult period.
Ahora dependo de mi ministro de Cultura, que no sé quién es el hombre invisible.
So now I depend on my Minister of Culture and I don't know who he is. He's the invisible man.
es algo menos que un hombre, o sea, no existe.
It's something less than a man. It doesn't exist.
De eso dependemos, del hombre invisible.
That's who we depend on, the invisible man.
Thank you, Angelica, for sharing how not only your practice, but really the context under which you're having to try and practice and trying to do the very important work that you need to do in the context or under the context of an invisible man who is supposed to be sharing coins and sharing money. I appreciate that vulnerability and that transparency. At this time, I'd like to remind our viewers that they are warmly welcome to send questions that they may have for the speakers, as well as Francine Hoban, who gave the keynote speech earlier today. You're more than welcome to put those questions into the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. And I would like to invite you to clearly indicate to whom your question is directed when you write it, for the ease of the team who will be making a selection from the question. So please don't be shy, put your questions into the Q&A function. I want to go into a bit of the conversation now and ask you, Thomas, in general, how did international collaborations form a part of your operations in a pre-COVID-19 world, structurally, financially, content-wise, etc.? And how has that changed with the pandemic of 2020?
Well, when we heard about the first lockdown end of March, we were 1 week, 5 days ahead of our festival. So the team and the technical team from Kirill Serebrennikov from Russia was already there. We were supposed to host Angelica Lidell's Scarlet Letters, amongst the many other performances. And we had to cancel this festival. And we had to try to deal with the people who gives us the money for the festival. We tried to find a solution so that at least half of what the people would have gotten as a compensation for coming to us, so that they get at least half of it, in order to compensate the salary for the company and for the artists. And we achieved that, which was thanks to our state money, because you have to know that repertory theater as we have it in Germany are usually not allowed to host other companies. So in order to make our festival run, continue and survive, we need to apply for extra money. And this is what we did for over the last 20 years. Every time apply for extra money to make international collaboration on this level possible, because Berlin as a city considers itself as a big city focusing on culture and the arts. But in fact, we do have a lack of a big, important international theater festival. And with our festival, we try to step into this void in order to bring international theater to Germany. It's pretty different than, for example, for Paris, because we don't have this big tradition of international collaboration, as we have so many companies, German-speaking companies in Berlin, as this tradition of repertory theater is so strong and important in German theater landscape. The tradition of exchange is not as strong and as important as in Paris, for example. I think Angelica does perform much more in France, in Paris, than she did in Germany. And also added to what I've been talking about, hosting theatrical events from abroad, from everywhere in the world, actually. We as a team, as a theater, are touring a lot internationally. So before the COVID crisis, we've been every year to around 20 different countries, where we've been showing around 100 performances each season. This has become for us as a theater, first of all, very important concerning our aesthetics and our content, what we are talking about, and also the spirit of the company. So since we are touring the world, I think the actors, the members of the company did get a much more bigger awareness of what world we're living in. And this adds, for me, to their capacity in the rehearsal room to talk about, to quote Angelica, tragedy, you know, because Germany so far can be considered as an island of the happy few in a world which is facing so many problems. And so it for me was very important to have this touring as a source of inspiration for our theater work. To give you just one example, the show of Enemy of the People, we've been touring now for 8 years. I think we've been performing this show in 35 different cities. And we've been doing a documentary movie on this, which is called Mapping Democracy, because in this show, there's a participatory moment where we ask the audience to intervene and to take part in a discussion about ecological scandals and how much economy influences democracy, our parliaments. It's quite interesting to see this documentary and to see that pretty much everywhere in the world we share the same problems, that we are not having so much confidence anymore that democracy is a concept we really can see truthfully in our states, but it's more quite a hypocrite act of trying to make run economy and to pretend to be in a democratic situation. So this is talking about the content, but I think your question was also about the economic reality. So our economic reality as the team of the Schaubühne is that every year we had a huge income from our touring, which was around 2 million euro, which was important to continue the work as an institution, because we've been dealing with this sum of money every year. We put it in our budget. We engaged people, we engaged touring managers, video artists, sound artists, and so on to make possible this touring, this worldwide touring. And now we find ourselves in the situation that we are an institution which is able to do this because we have the collaborators, we have the knowledge, we have the technology, but we don't have the money anymore. Because nobody, of course, we've been canceling this season around 12 different cities where we were supposed to go over this year, and of course none of this happened, and now we have this lack of income, which puts us in the next years under serious circumstances. And we've been trying to discuss this with the politics in Berlin. They told us that they understand what's going on, but they also made clear that they will not step in and they cannot take over this amount of money to provide our budget we are dealing with.
Thank you, Thomas, for sharing really the impacts that even an institution like yours, in a context that is so well-funded as Berlin, is experiencing under the realities of COVID-19. Angelica, I would like to ask a similar question in the sense of what did your international collaborations look like in a pre-COVID-19 context? How has that changed in the context of COVID-19? And have there been any structural responses from government to try and cover the shortfall, some of the shortfalls that Thomas was mentioning that artists, producers, etc., technicians are experiencing as a result of the loss of work and jobs and touring opportunities due to COVID-19 in Spain?
Bueno, mi trabajo ha dependido muchísimo de personas que han confiado en él, ¿no? Es para mí mi relación más importante con todos los circuitos internacionales ha sido una relación de personas que han confiado en un trabajo, ¿no? Y han apostado por él.
So the international collaboration before always happened on a basis of trust. We had good relationships with companies around, and then we worked on those relationships.
Entonces, claro, siempre hay que, quiero decir, eso se ha cortado, ¿no? Esa comunicación, ¿no? Es una comunicación entre el gestor y el creador, ¿no? Es una línea que ya se ha vuelto muy frágil y está a punto de partirse, ¿no?
And that connection is now, in the times that we're in, it's essentially broken down. It's a very fragile line that you have between the creator and the people you're working with.
Porque, bueno, finalmente la cultura, lo que conocemos, a lo que llamamos cultura, es una mezcla de sensibilidad y de dinero.
And what we call culture is a mix between sensitivity and money.
Y verdaderamente cuando no se produce ese encuentro entre la sensibilidad y el dinero es cuando fracasa la cultura.
And when there's no understanding between these two elements, that's when the culture fails.
Quiero decir, y eso no depende de una pandemia. Eso no tiene, la pandemia no tiene nada que ver con esa relación entre el dinero y la sensibilidad.
And it's not because of the pandemic that this breaks down. This has nothing to do with that. That was always at risk, the connection between the two elements.
Entonces, yo no estoy tan preocupada por la pandemia como por esta cosa abrumadora. Estamos abrumados por nuestras responsabilidades democráticas, ¿no?
So I'm not so worried about the impacts of the pandemic. It's kind of, as these were issues that were existing before.
Estamos abrumados por nuestras responsabilidades democráticas. Vivimos abrumados por nuestras responsabilidades democráticas, ¿no?
Yeah, we're kind of instead completely taken over by our democratic responsibility.
Y nos olvidamos de que el arte es insobornable y que no está relacionado con la pandemia ni con un discurso económico, exactamente, ¿no?
So you can't repress art. It can't be repressed by the pandemic, and it can't be repressed by this economic dialogue.
O sea, hay una diferencia entre la cultura y el arte.
There's a difference between the culture and art.
La cultura está asfixiada por las responsabilidades democráticas.
Culture is strangled by democratic responsibility.
Y el arte es la libertad.
And art is freedom.
Entonces, lo que se ve afectado es la cultura, el discurso económico es lo que determina la cultura, pero lo que de verdad sigue siendo libre y está por encima de la pandemia es el arte.
So this whole economic discussion is what's kind of funneling into art, but art into culture. But art is free. Art is free from all of
O
it.
sea, tendemos a asociar estas dos cosas en un solo concepto. La cultura y el arte tendemos a asociarlo y a no disociarlo. Es decir, no estamos haciendo un discurso espiritual, estamos haciendo un discurso económico y eso va a asfixiar, eso revienta, ¿no? Por todos los lados.
So the problem is instead of having a spiritual discussion about art, we're being strangled by this economic discussion the whole time.
Entonces estamos corriendo el riesgo de asfixiarnos a causa de unas responsabilidades con respecto a una expresión, al mundo de las expresiones que tiene que ver con otras cosas distintas al discurso económico, ¿no?
So we're at the risk again of being strangled by these economic responsibilities instead of thinking about the freedom that comes from art.
Y bueno, ese es el camino, es decir, yo estoy en quiero decir, es como, no sé si lo decía el Marqués de Sade, si no puedo escribir con tinta, escribiré con mierda, ¿no?
Yeah, I don't know if it was said by Marquis de Sade that if I can't write with ink, I'll write with shit. You know, I will find a way.
Es decir, yo ahora no estoy tan preocupada porque mis proyectos sean apoyados económicamente como para poder realizarlos, lo que sea. O sea, mi angustia es no poder estar en un escenario expresándome libremente, artísticamente, estéticamente. Esa es mi angustia, es estética. No es económica, mi angustia es estética, no es económica.
So my anxiety and my concern is aesthetic, it's not economic. It's not being able to be on the stage, not being able to express myself, not to have the freedom of art. It's not an economic.
Y tampoco
stress.
hace falta una pandemia ni 40 millones de muertos para que nos pongamos a reflexionar sobre el mundo del espíritu y de la expresión, ¿no?
And it shouldn't take a pandemic or 40 million people dying for us to really engage with the spirit of expression.
Yo de verdad que no saco nada bueno de esta experiencia de la epidemia, ¿no? Y no creo que vayan a cambiar tampoco las cosas siempre cambian para peor.
So I haven't had anything good come out of the pandemic, and I don't know if anything good is going to happen. Things always seem to get worse. Right?
Entonces a veces me da la sensación de que ya es, o sea, que el discurso es vamos a salvar el culo todos, ¿no? Pero el discurso ya no está en torno al espíritu, ya ese discurso en torno al espíritu y a las artes, ese discurso ya se ha perdido, todo el discurso económico, no me interesa, ¿no?
It seems like the discussion when it comes to culture and all this is how can we save our asses? What can we do? Instead of how can we really engage with the profound questions of art and the spiritual nature.
Y o sea, lo que a mí me está matando, lo que está acabando conmigo es no poder expresarme.
And what's killing me right now, what's really, really, really getting to me is not being able to express myself.
No hacer el rito, no hacer el sacrificio.
To not have the ritual, to not have the sacrifice.
No hay rito, no hay sacrificio, no hay tragedia. Eso es lo que no soporto.
And that's what I can't stand. There is no tragedy, there is no ritual, there is no sacrifice. I can't stand that.
Me estoy convirtiendo en escritora, que es una cosa que detesto.
I'm turning into a writer, something that I detest.
Entonces, quiero decir que claro que hay un discurso económico, pero como yo siempre he trabajado en la precariedad, no es algo que a mí me esté afectando tanto como la ausencia del rito, ¿no? Que es lo que mi alma necesita, la expiación, necesita el rito, necesita...
Yeah, I've always worked in a precarious nature, so again, it's not the economic nature that worries me, it's the lack of ritual, the lack of sacrifice.
Thank you so much, Angelica, for that comprehensive answer and highlighting, I think, what is a really important point and something that can often get a bit obfuscated or lost, this the eclipsing of the spiritual, social nature of art by conversations around the economic realities or impacts. And I particularly want to highlight what you say about how the current pandemic is not the thing that is creating the precarity that artists are experiencing and the cultural sector is experiencing and the cultural community is experiencing, that this precarity was pre-existing by virtue of the way that the system has been set up and the system has been operated and the way that resources have been disseminated in an unequal way. And this highlighting, the pandemic has highlighted this kind of this equilibrium or this inequality in the resources that are available to do this spiritual work of art and to take on that responsibility of the spirituality and the social connectivity that art provides. And on that note, speaking about the social and civic responsibility that art has, I want to ask the question, as Francine Hoban in her keynote address earlier highlighted, the connection between culture and the climate. And I want to hear from you, Thomas, what from your perspective is the role or the responsibility of cultural workers and artists and organizations in the context of the looming climate crisis with regards to international collaboration?
Yeah, there's a big responsibility, and I'm a little bit afraid that probably if we take things serious, we will not go back to normal as we had normality before, which was taking a plane and going to any continent in the world and performing a show. So I do believe that we have to be very aware of how dangerous this is for our ecological footprint. There have been negotiations going on with our Senate of Berlin, who provides us with our finances, if they could think about a compensation model which is already existing, if we could participate in that. But maybe this is not the right step to take. Maybe the right step to take is to maybe not continue this, at least this intercontinental exchange, and to think about if it comes to Europe and neighboring countries and continents, to find a way to try to do this via train. Which then, of course, would mean that you have to be much more intelligent in planning a tour, that you cannot go in and out, that you have to make a tour from one city to another, and that you have to be much more serious in the planning, because it'll take much more time to do this touring. But I want to add to this comment, or to this answer to your question. I want to add that I really do see at the moment this exchange of culture, of theater culture and theater art. I really do believe that this is very much put into question, and it's very much at risk at the moment, not only because we cannot travel because of the pandemic at the moment, but also I do believe that when we go, if one day we go back to normality, I think that these forums of international exchange are the last thing which the responsible politicians do have in mind when they think about how do we go back to a situation which was there before. I think a lot of people do consider this as a surplus of the culture which is anywhere there. So I'm afraid that what we have seen during the pandemic, that the nation and nationwide solutions for the pandemic, and not international collaboration and solidarity, and even not on the European level, we have a shared policy facing this pandemic. So I do believe that this pandemic will also encourage nationalism and national ideas of culture, and we really do have to fight to keep this idea alive, that this is important in order to understand our neighboring countries and all the other people in the world.
Thank you, Thomas, for highlighting, I think, what is a really far-reaching observation with regard to the strengthening of the nation-state mentality, the continued securitization of the borders in the EU and European countries, which I think is also important to consider in the unequal relationship between the global North, the global South, Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, these historic unequal relationships in terms of the dissemination and the distribution of resources. And Angelica, I want to send the same question into your direction with this understanding of how the borders are kind of strengthening in Europe, preventing certain kinds of international collaboration, more so between members of the global North and the global South, with this kind of like long-standing history of colonization, which is connected to the ecological crisis that we see today. What do you feel as an independent artist and independent cultural worker is the responsibility of these kinds of artists, these kinds of independent workers in responding to the looming climate crisis?
Bueno, la responsabilidad del artista es con su propio espíritu, ¿no? Esa es la única responsabilidad que tiene el artista, es con su propio espíritu.
So the only responsibility the artist has is with their own spirit.
Pero aparte de esto, sí que pienso que nos hemos olvidado de que la cultura no solo es algo que se crea en los aparatos, en la administración, o sea, parece que la cultura depende de la administración, de lo administrativo, de los gobiernos, ¿no?
We seem to have forgotten that culture is not just something that's created by administrations, by governments, by things in there.
La cultura, lo que yo entiendo por cultura, la verdadera cultura, es la cultura como llamaba hay un escritor español que se llama José Bergamín. Para él la cultura, yo estoy de acuerdo con él, era la cultura analfabeta, la cultura sin instrucción.
Yeah, so what I understand by culture is something that said a Spanish writer, José Bergamín, which is that culture is something without instruction.
No, sin instrucción es la cultura analfabeta, la cultura que no está instruida.
The culture which is not which is directed, ¿no? Que no.
No,
Sí, bueno.
analfabeta. ¿Sabes la palabra?
No, pues no.
Analfabeto es el que no sabe leer ni escribir.
Okay, someone who is culture is someone who doesn't know how to read or how to write or how to read.
Claro, o sea, la cultura fundacional, lo que nos funda, lo que nos hace hombres, es la cultura analfabeta.
So what makes us real, what kind of grounds us, is this culture which is completely instinctive. It's not about reading and writing, it's this instinctive.
No es la cultura de la que se habla en los despachos.
It's not about culture they speak about in offices.
Es la cultura de la tierra.
It's the culture of the ground.
La cultura que va donde nace lo que nos funda, lo que construye nuestra alma, ¿no?
It's the culture which comes to the ground and constructs our spirit, constructs our soul.
Y ahí es donde hay que buscar. Mi abuela no sabía leer ni escribir.
And that's where you need to look. You know, my grandma didn't know how to write or to read.
Y todo lo que yo he aprendido, lo he aprendido de mi abuela.
And everything that I learned from my grandmother.
Mi abuela vivía en un pueblo muy pequeñito de Extremadura.
Yeah, my grandmother lived in a very small village in Extremadura. It's a region to the west of Spain.
No sé si conocéis la película de Buñuel que se titula Las Urdes.
Now, I don't know if you know a film by Buñuel called Los Urdes.
Y todo lo que yo he aprendido, lo he aprendido de una mujer que no sabía leer ni escribir, que se dedicaba a arar el campo.
And everything I learned from a woman who didn't know how to write or read. She just worked in the countryside.
Pues yo creo que hay que buscar a esa gente.
I think you need to find those people.
Hay que buscarla en el globo norte y en el globo sur.
You have to look for them in the global north and the global south.
Pero no para meterla en un despacho.
Not in order to put them in an office.
Ni para hacer antropología.
Nor to do anthropology.
Ni para cubrir nuestro sentimiento de culpa.
Nor to cover our sense of guilt.
Sino para entrar en contacto con lo que nos hace seres humanos.
but instead to put us back into contact with what makes us be human beings.
Y ahí solamente en ese lugar se encuentra lo poético.
It's only in this moment, in this meeting, that you find poetry.
No poetry, lo poético. No la poesía, sino lo poético.
No, you find the poetic.
The poetic, not the poetry. The artist, we are the poetry. No, traduce.
No, yes.
Traduce.
The artist is the poetry.
Los artistas somos poesía,
The artists are poetry,
pero nunca seremos lo poético,
but will never be the poetic.
porque lo poético está en la tierra.
Because the poetic is in the earth,
No in the earth, in the ground.
in the ground.
In the ground. Y eso tenemos que saber ir a buscarlo y no resolverlo administrativamente. Ese discurso es un discurso, no es una responsabilidad, es una obligación.
And this, it's not going to be found in the offices. This is not this is an obligation. It's not a responsibility, it's an obligation.
Es una obligación porque la belleza es una obligación.
It's an obligation because beauty is an obligation.
Y tenemos que ir a buscar la belleza a esos lugares.
And we need to go and find beauty in these places.
Pero no para meterlos en un despacho.
But not in order to put it into an office.
No para meterlos en nuestras responsabilidades democráticas.
Not to put it inside our democratic responsibilities.
Sino para aprender del alma humana, ¿no? Sino para ponernos en contacto con el alma humana y con las emociones.
No, instead to put us in contact with the human spirit and emotion.
Entonces tenemos mucho camino que hacer. Tenemos que ir a ver a los campesinos.
So we have a long journey to go, and we have to go and find the people working in the countryside.
Las canciones, los cantos de los campesinos mientras aran sus tierras, mientras trabajan la tierra.
The songs these people sing whilst they were working on the earth.
Los cantos de los pescadores mientras pescan.
The songs of the fishermen whilst they were fishing.
La cultura oral, no la escrita, la cultura oral.
The oral culture, not the written culture, oral culture.
Y eso hay que hacerlo ya.
And that has to be done now.
Y si hay que coger aviones y el medio ambiente, pues no, si contaminamos el medio ambiente habrá que ir en avión, pero habrá que ir en avión.
In order to fulfill this obligation, if we have to go by plane and there has to be a little bit of contamination, that's a necessary part of it.
Porque al final, claro, no es tanto el cambio climático, sino para mí las catedrales humanas son lo importante, más que preservar el medio ambiente, no, para mí lo importante es preservar al hombre, al ser humano, pero al ser humano como tal, con sus conflictos y sus dolores y sus sufrimientos.
For me, it's about finding the human cathedral of humanity, not necessarily about the environment. We have to protect what it is to be human, the pains, the tragedies, the journey of being human.
Bueno, eso es.
Thank you so much, Angelica, for highlighting the need for that paradigmatic shift, the shift from focusing on the kind of Western tradition of the written word as doctrine and as law, and moving back into or re-centering, re-highlighting oral traditions that are so ubiquitous throughout the world, as you say, not only in the global South, but as well in the global North, and the need to have that paradigmatic shift in the way that we think about our relationship to each other on the earth, but also our relationship to the earth or to the ground, as you put it. And it makes me think of what Francine Houben highlights in her architectural practice, the fundamental principles of people, place, purpose, and poetry. And at this time, I'd like to move into the Q&A session of this discussion and invite Francine to join us in the Q&A. And I'll begin with a question that comes from Dana Ruffalo, Editor-in-Chief of Plays International and Europe, which is directed to Thomas Ostermeyer. What signs of an aftermath of COVID-19 do you anticipate in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? In other words, do you anticipate that there will still be the desperate recuperation measures from the Schaubühne, or more positively, new ideas that will have to be generated during this pandemic period?
No, Honestly, I do believe what we already can see as team of the Schaubühne looking and planning the future, we can see that our program will become poorer, much more poor, because there won't be enough money to do as many productions as we did before. There won't be enough money to host as many international theater artists as we did before. So we are facing in 2 years' time, even probably in 5 years' time, we're facing a situation where our repertoire will not be as rich as it was before, where we will probably not go touring as much as we did before. And I don't know if we could imagine projects which can compensate this loss. I mean, if you listen to Angelica, you can see that her expression as an artist is a physical kind of expression. Even via the screen, you can feel that there is a need to be in a three-dimensional space, and so I hardly can see any alternative to be in front of an audience in a three-dimensional space. So I do hear in this question that we should think about digital means and other ways of telling our stories. But we are, all the artists I'm talking about here, especially Angelica and me, we could, if we would like to, we could all go into the movies or other medias. We could become video artists, but we decided to be theater artists. We decided to be artists who do have their passion in front of an audience and do need to feel the same breath like the audience has, and to share this breath. So I hardly see any compensation. What I do see is an urgent need from European politicians to help us survive, on a European level, this way of making art. And otherwise we will lose, to again quote Angelica, we will lose the beauty of this theatrical landscape. But this is not only true for Europe, this is of course also true worldwide.
Many thanks, Thomas. My next question I want to direct to Angelica, and perhaps even Francine can comment on the implications of this question. But Angelica, as an artist, what are your expectations towards European politics to work in freedom, as you expressed? And this question comes from Tobias Veit. And I wonder, from Francine's position, possibly, what should the expectations be to encourage the creation of culture? What should those expectations be to our governments, to European politics, to allow the possibility of artistic freedom? Maybe Angelica, if you would like to begin, and then we can hear from Francine after.
¿Contesto?
Sí.
Mis expectativas de la política que tienen que hacer los políticos en Europa.
Sí.
No espero mucho de los políticos, no espero prácticamente nada.
I don't expect much from European politics. I don't expect very much anything.
Porque quiero decir, la política es lo opuesto al pensamiento.
Politics is the opposite of thinking.
Entonces puedo esperar más bien poco. Creo que el pensamiento es libre y un político nunca es libre.
In fact, I kind of expect little, you know. Freedom, thinking is free, and politicians are not able to think freely.
Entonces es un choque irresoluble, ¿no? Bueno, las relaciones entre el poder y el artista son muy complejas.
The relationships between power and the artist are very, very complex, and there is this kind of shock of coming together.
Porque el artista necesita del poder,
But the artist needs power,
pero es imposible un entendimiento profundo.
but having a deep understanding is impossible.
Entonces, casi el artista tiene que engañar al político, ¿no?
It's almost as if the artist has to kind of trick or kind of the politician.
Porque el político nunca alcanzará a comprender la libertad en la que se desenvuelve el arte, ¿no?
Because the politician will never manage to understand the freedom that surrounds the artist.
De hecho, antes de la pandemia, políticamente es imposible ya, o sea, el puritanismo que cae sobre el mundo de la expresión es terrible, ¿no? Desde el mundo de la política.
Even before the pandemic, the kind of puritanism that fell on the artist was terrible.
Es el puritanismo,
Yeah,
¿no?
the puritanism,
Todas las limitaciones. Ahora en el cine, van a dar puntos por hablar, se dan puntos por hablar de mujeres, te dan puntos por hablar del medio ambiente, te dan puntos por hablar por la integración social, dan puntos y cuanto más puntos, más dinero te dan.
And now, even in the world of cinema, for example, they give you points for talking about women, about the environment, about social integration. And the more points you have, the more money you receive.
Claro, entonces, ¿qué? Te dan... Esto ya es la creación por puntos, ¿no?
And this is creating for points.
O sea, que si no hablo de mujeres, no me dais un punto.
So if I don't create for women, you're not going to give me any points.
Entonces, claro, esas son las relaciones. Las verdaderas relaciones con la política son esas. Son unas relaciones ajenas a la sensibilidad y a la libertad.
So really, the relationships you have with the politicians, they're apart from understanding and free expression.
Sensibility.
And sensibility.
Porque, claro, es que estamos muy, 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 muy alejados. O sea, el Estado necesita artistas oficiales con los que no tener problemas, ¿no?
Yeah, we're very far away. The state needs official artists with which you don't have problems.
Yo me acuerdo de Abbas Kiarostami, el director de cine.
I remember Abbas
Kiarostami.
Abbas Kiarostami, the cinema director.
Que, bueno, él decía, caramba, ¿para qué? Yo vengo de un país con censura, ¿no? Él decía. Él venía de un país con censura.
He said that he came from a country with censorship.
Y nos decía a los españoles, y vosotros que estáis libres, usáis la libertad para hacer esta basura, para ser unos mediocres.
He said he came to Spain and he said, you use this freedom to create this rubbish, this worthlessness.
Sí, la mediocridad, ¿no?
Yeah, complete mediocrity.
Entonces, hay que tener mucho cuidado en las relaciones con la política porque es muy fácil que desemboquen en la mediocridad.
You got to be very careful in the relationships with politicians because it's very possible that it ends up in mediocrity.
Thank you for that, Angelica. And actually, Francine, we received a question that is directed towards you. So I don't know if maybe you'd like to incorporate the previous question that I asked you and this new question that I think is more specific to your practice. But we have a question from Heidi Wiley asking, how would you transform existing stages in existing theater houses to open up and to stimulate more informal encounters? Francine, your mic, yes.
That is for me almost, it's several questions. First of all, I think it's extremely important that especially the old theaters, they feel for a lot of people very elitist, that you go into, that's what I said, also the old typology was always everywhere the same and copied in the rest of the world. And it's not, doesn't feel a place for all. It's not welcoming for all. So to have this feeling, and what we also did with libraries, that you feel much more welcoming, is extremely important, and that opens up. I think for me it's very important also to have the formal and combine the formal and the informal, and the informal also, of course, also takes place in the street, the foyer, and the space in between. I think that's for me a very important issue. But also what I think, because you're talking, of course, a lot about the pandemic, we should, one of my themes is be prepared for predictable and unpredictable changes. And also the theater world should be prepared for that. So maybe you should think less monofunctional. That a hall, an auditorium is just meant for this or for that. Maybe I also realized, because I also work in New York, if you look, for instance, to the Lincoln Center, it's very much in a way money driven. It has auditoriums of 3,000 people. What is not good for the acoustics. The seats are little, very little. So they have to change that, but it's also balance better your business model. Because I expect that this issue, what is now in the pandemic, partly will continue. It's issues about ventilation, about hygiene, about social distances. I expect it's very much about risk management. All these they will come back. So to deal in a healthy way with the auditoria. Will of course influence the business model of theaters, but you have to deal with it. And I think you should go back to the essence, and that's what also the other speakers told. What is the essence of theater? It's very much the person who talks and the audience. You know, that's the extremely important. And then you have to play. How much audience do you need? But I expect that the next year will be smaller. And then how much money and technique you have to organize around it. Maybe we have, I said for me, the future is very much about forward to basics. And if you think, what are the basics of theater and how you can combine it with the use of intelligent technology, maybe somewhere there is a solution. But I totally agree, you want to be, as an artist, as a player, you need the stage to be in contact and to perform in front of an audience. But I don't think that the audience will be very big anymore, unless you can really deal with create a healthy environment. That's what I expect.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Francine. I see that we've come to the end of our time together in this conversation, but I just want to bring back to our minds some of the things that have been raised about the responsibility that we have, not only as a creative community, but as a global community as you say, Francine, going forward to basics. As Angelica said, the responsibility of the artist is to their spirit and to centralize that ability to activate and to manifest that spirit. And this necessity for risk management and the reality, as Thomas reminded us, that we are not in the profession that we are in because we chose to be digital artists. We did decide and want to be in this kind of live world, and there are certain responsibilities that we will collectively have in order to be able to make that a reality again. And that responsibility is not only on us as cultural workers, but it's also very much on the people that are making structural decisions at the level of government, at the level of the EU, about the possibilities for the cultural sector and creating and providing relief for people to be able to have access to the resources that they need to be able to create the context for artists to be able to manifest and express their artistic spirit. There will be many more activities today where these conversations can be gone into in greater depth. But at this point, I want to give a thank you to Angelica, a thank you to Thomas, And a thank you to Francine for your time, your insights today. A huge thank you to the European Theatre Forum Consortium for putting this important conversation on the agenda and for inviting me to be part of it today. And the biggest thank you to all of those who have joined us in the audience to view this conversation today. Many thanks and goodbye.
Well, many thanks to you, Kopano, as well for brilliantly moderating this session. I think I could have listened to this for another couple of hours, but at this point, we want to inform the guest lists participants that we will meet back after a 15 minutes break for the next session called Artists Workshop Found in Translation, Diversity and Understanding in International Theatre Cooperation. You will find the link to the session in the auditorium on the platform, on the forum platform. And to the attendees in the live stream, they are invited to come back to the live stream at 12:30 for the European Theatre Forum's conclusion. So see you in 15 minutes.